In 2018, a team of gene scientists pulled DNA from ancient bones in southern Iraq, the old home ground of Sumer. They were tracking how ancient people moved across the world. Instead, they found genetic markers that show up nowhere else on record, appearing all at once around 5,000 years ago, the exact moment the first Sumerian kings were said to take the throne. The same kings the tablets say ruled for tens of thousands of years. The same kings the Sumerians swore were not fully human. So what happens when the bones start agreeing with the myth? Before we get to the bones, we need the document, because this whole story rests on one single object, and that object is not a legend. It sits in a glass case in Oxford, and anyone with a museum ticket can walk up and look at it. The Weld-Blundell Prism, catalog number Weld-Blundell 444, a clay block about 8 inches tall, 4 flat sides, 2 columns of cuneiform pressed into each one. It was carved in southern Mesopotamia around 1800 BCE. And it is the most complete copy we have of a text experts call the Sumerian King List. There are about 24 other broken pieces. This one is the key piece. Picture the scribe who made it, a trained man in a temple school, a reed pen in his hand, wet clay turning under his fingers as he works the 4 faces of the prism in order. He is not writing a story. He is copying a record, line by line, from older lists that were already old when he was born. Grain lists use the same hand, tax receipts use the same hand. This is record keeping. And the thing he is filing away, in the flattest record-keeping voice the ancient world ever made, is a list of kings who could not have existed. They did not write a myth. They wrote a record, and the record lists people who should not be on it. The list opens with a line that nearly every translator turns into the same words. When kingship was lowered from heaven, it was in Eridu. Eridu was the first city, not the oldest ruin we have dug up. The first city, period, according to the people who lived downstream of it. Before Eridu, the Sumerians said, people lived in scattered groups with no kings, no writing, no order. Then power came down from above, fully formed, and it landed in one place. The first king is named Allulim. According to the Prism, Allulim ruled for 28,800 years. That is not a mistake in the translation. That number is carved into the clay. The next king ruled 36,000 years. The one after that? 43,200. Down the columns the reigns run, city to city, from Eridu to Bad Tabira to Larak to Sippar to Shuruppak. 8 kings across 5 cities. Add their reigns together, and you reach 241,200 years. All of it before the flood. All of it from a single list, written in the same hand as a receipt for barley. Here is the detail almost everyone skips. The moment the flood arrives in the text, the numbers crash. After the flood, kingship goes on. The kings keep coming, but their reigns drop out of the tens of thousands and into the hundreds, a few centuries each. Read further and they fall again, into lengths a long-lived human could actually reach. By the time the list reaches rulers we can check against other records, the lengths look completely normal. The impossible years and the believable years sit in the same document, in the same handwriting, split apart by one event, a flood. As if a clerk had been writing down 2 different kinds of being in the same book and only changed the units halfway down. So the first question is the one historians asked first. What do you do with 241,000 years? The usual answer is careful, and it is probably right. The Sumerians counted in base 60. Their way of counting time ran on 2 sacred units, the Sar, which stood for 3,600 years, and the Nur, which stood for 600. Every reign in that opening part is a clean multiple of those units. Nothing ragged, nothing in between. Allulim's 28,800 years is exactly 8 Sars, and not a day more. The numbers are math dressed up as a calendar. In 1939, the scholar Thorkild Jacobsen wrote the study that still anchors the field, and he read the early part as a kind of symbol, a way of saying these kings were huge, ancient, closer to gods than to men, without claiming any real calendar. Later, scholars pushed it further. The whole before the flood total breaks down into neat mixes of those sacred numbers, the kind of pattern a trained scribe builds on purpose, not the kind a record falls into by accident. Put simply, the dull answer is that a Bronze Age people wrote huge round numbers to mean huge and important, and we spent 100 years reading their poetry as a stopwatch. That answer covers almost everything on the Prism. Almost, because there is a piece of this that the math does not touch, and most people never hear it. The list does not only hand out the long reigns, it tells you where the kings came from, and it never changes that point across any copy. Kingship came down. It did not rise up out of the villages of Sumer over generations. It came down, out of the sky, finished, and was placed into the hands of named men in a named city. And the powers said to bring it down have a name of their own, the Anunnaki. In Sumerian and Babylonian writing, the Anunnaki are the high gods, the ones who fixed the order of the world. The god tied most closely to Eridu, that first city, is Enki, lord of the freshwater deep, a place the Sumerians called the Abzu. Enki is the one their stories say handed people the building blocks of civilization: writing, law, working metal, watering the land. The list of gifts reads less like a blessing and more like a school lesson plan. And the kings did not rule alone. The same old story places beside each before the flood king an advisor, one of 7 wise men the Sumerians called the Apkallu, sent up out of the Abzu by Enki to teach the skills of civilization to men. Centuries later, a Babylonian priest named Berossus would write these same wise men into Greek, describing the first of them as a creature called Oannes, a being with the body of a fish that came out of the sea each day to teach people and went back to the water each night. Not quite a god, not a man either, something in between, standing at the shoulder of every king on the list. What makes Berossus matter is the distance. He wrote more than 1,500 years after the prism in Oxford was carved in a different empire, in a different language, working from temple records that have since been lost. And he writes down the exact same pattern: 10 kings before the flood, ruling for 432,000 years between them, 120 SARs laid end to end. Different total, the same machine. This was a tradition they guarded. The Mesopotamians copied these numbers again and stood by them for the better part of 2,000 years, and never once quietly fixed them into something believable. In 1976, a writer named Sitchin took all of this and shaped it into one explosive claim. He said the Anunnaki were never gods at all, but flesh and blood visitors from another world, and that the impossible reigns on the king list were not symbols but real records. The true life lengths of beings who simply were not human. The experts who study these tablets reject Sitchin almost down the line. They say his translations are wrong, the planet he made up does not exist, and his way of working is to pick the answer first and bend the cuneiform to reach it. A lot of that criticism is fair. What the criticism does not wipe out is the document underneath it. Sitchin did not write the king list. He did not press 28,000 years into that prism. The Sumerians did, 15 centuries before he was born, in their own dry clerk's hand, and they stored it next to their grain records as a thing that simply happened. You can throw out the man entirely and still be left holding the clay. Which brings us back to the bones. If you wanted to end this argument tomorrow, you would do the obvious thing. You would test the Sumerians directly, pull DNA from the people buried in those first cities, read their genome, and see whether they sit on the same family tree as every other human being or somewhere off the edge of it. Clean. Final. Except you almost cannot do it. Southern Mesopotamia is one of the worst places on Earth to keep ancient DNA in one piece. The heat cooks it. The wet seasons finish what the heat start. For all the tablets and ziggurats and gold that have come out of Sumer, the actual bodies of the Sumerians have given up almost no readable DNA at all. As of the early 2020s, the full ancient DNA ever published from Mesopotamia came from the north. Farmers from places in the Zagros foothills, from Shanidar Cave, from the upper Tigris in what is now northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey. From the southern cities, the Eridu and Uruk country, the true Sumerian home ground, the genetic record is close to a blank page. And the northern DNA that does exist tells a flat, human story. When scientists finally pulled full DNA from those Zagros and Upper Tigris farmers and laid it next to everyone else, what came back was a group of ordinary Stone Age people, related to their neighbors, mixing with hill groups moving down into the valleys over long stretches of time. Civilization built up bit by generations of people marrying across a river. No edge of the family tree, no off-ramp, just farmers, slowly becoming a city. That blank page in the south is the whole problem, and it is where the trouble starts. A few years on, a separate study made the gap wider instead of closing it. In 2025, scientists managed to read the DNA of a remarkably well-kept skeleton from an Old Kingdom Egyptian tomb, a man who lived around the dawn of the Pyramid Age. Roughly a fifth of his family line traced straight back to the Fertile Crescent, the Tigris and Euphrates country where Sumer once stood. Real gene mixing between Mesopotamia and Egypt, proven in a lab for the first time. And what did it show? Ordinary human movement. People marrying, trading, traveling, mixing. Nothing stranger than that. Every scrap of real DNA evidence we can actually hold points the dull, human way. And then there is the study this video opened with, the 2018 claim. In alternative history groups, it gets passed around in a fixed shape, retold the same way every time. A genetics lab tests ancient bones from the south and supposedly finds markers that fit no known group of humans, appearing out of nothing, right at the dawn of Sumerian kingship, the exact time the prism sets aside for its first, not quite human rulers. So here is the honest part, and it matters. That clean study, checked by other scientists, from southern Sumer, the one that proves the kings were not human, does not exist in the real science in the shape the story claims. What exists is the empty space, a near total blank where southern Sumerian DNA ought to be, and an empty space that fringe stories have raced to fill with the wildest answer on the shelf. That is the letdown of it. Nobody found a non-human genome under Eridu. They found an empty shelf where the genome should be, and then they printed a label for the empty shelf, and sold the label as the discovery. That sounds like the end of the story. It is not. Step back from the bones for a moment and look at the whole pattern, because the pattern is the strange part, not any single tablet. A civilization appears in southern Iraq more or less complete. Writing, watering the fields, written law, reading the stars, the wheel, the base, 60 math we still use every time we cut an hour into 60 minutes. It does not creep up over slow, trackable centuries the way the textbooks expect. It arrives, and the people it arrives with leave behind a founding record that says, in plain record-keeping words, that they did not build any of it themselves, that it was lowered to them, from above, by beings they flatly refuse to call human. What comes next is the part that still does not sit right, for the experts and the fringe alike. Think about how fast it actually happened. For most of human history, people lived in villages, and then in one stretch of southern Iraq, in the time experts call the Uruk period, that pattern broke. Uruk grew into a city of tens of thousands behind a wall, later stories credited to Gilgamesh himself. Full writing appears, going from simple marks and counts to a working writing system in a few short centuries. Giant temples,